All right. So, welcome into This Life Matters. I am your host, Drew, right alongside Gigi. How are you today, Gigi?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing good. I've had better days. This is our second time recording this. Maybe if you're a person who watches the show, you may have saw us live and saw that the internet interrupted. So, what I decided to do is, you know, sometimes you just got to ignore all the different things that go on and just do it old school. So, I'm just going to record it and then post it later. That's the easiest
Go
way I
go
know
with the
to
flow. Just got to
go
go
with the
with the
flow.
flow. Mm,
Exactly.
yeah.
So, what we're going to do here today is we're having a conversation about cultural competency. It's a series of conversations that we'll continue to have. And we're using cultural competency to kind of just to shift into these conversations that are more real. Gigi and I both have differences, as you can see. And so, it's one thing to just kind of talk about it and just put the obvious out there and talk about some of the easier clickbait kind of issues. But what we want to do is help you and help others along the way because there's work that we want to do to become better friends, to be a better person to the person on the other side of the screen. And so when you love someone, when you want to be competent, when you want to have an effort, it takes some skills. It's going to take some help. We're going to stumble through some things, but overall, we definitely have a desire to do this. So that's what we're going to be talking about today is continuing the conversation in cultural competency and talking about what it means to get a better understanding of cultural competency. But before we get started with all that, there's a question I always have to ask you because I'm genuinely interested and I want to know how you doing today.
I'm doing good. We as you said, we started this out. We were live. And so you may have heard part of that. I'm doing well, just coming back for the first out of town trip that I've made in over a year. Stayed in a hotel, ate 3 meals in a restaurant. Very strange seeing people with masks and without masks. And I do mask, and I have had I've had my two vaccinations. I had them a month ago. So I felt pretty, I felt really good about where I was, but it was kind of more rural area. It wasn't like in a big city. So there was some space there. It was good.
And I think that's such an interesting thing is just to see where we are as a country. Like for example, the big news that Texas is like, hey, we're going to be open. Like we're going to, full stadiums if the leagues allow, or just full gatherings. Everything's open, schools back open, and that's a hard thing for me. Like consider it's I don't get it, right? But I have to make a vow to be respectful, I guess, to people.
Well,
But
not that's not to say that the citizens are going to do that. Just because the governor's deflecting the attention on their failed electric system by doing this is what I think. But that doesn't mean that people are going to actually do this all the way. People are There's smart people out there. They see what this is, and if they haven't had their vaccinations, they're well aware that you know probably the people that were going to wear masks, they're going to wear masks and do what they've been doing. The people that weren't going to wear masks anyway, they're the ones that are going to go do whatever. So,
yeah. All right. Well, let's get into today's show, which is all about, just kind of getting a better understanding of what cultural competency is. And one of the best ways to do that is really just looking at the definition or some of the different definitions. What's your favorite definition of this term?
well, my favorite, and I'm just going to read it so I don't mess it up. Um, Underlying cultural competence are the principles of trust, respect for diversity, equity, fairness, and social justice. Culture is the fundamental building block of identity, and the development of a strong cultural identity is essential to an individual's healthy sense of who they are and where they belong. So that's resonates with me as far as what I think about cultural competency?
You know, when I was taking notes on that as you was reading, and one of the last pieces of that definition is the most important for me is this idea of like a healthy sense of who they are, like a healthy sense.
Hmm.
Um, you know, it for me, I had a sense of who I was, where I was in culture, and my position and my place. And I can say overall, as an African American, not, I can't speak for all African Americans, right? But
Hmm.
overall, we're well aware of who we are in the main view of this country. We know individually that individual people may not, echo the same theme that has been, that's been put out there. But when you understand your value, it's not always associated with a healthy value. Like, like I have a good understanding of who I am as a black man in this country, and it's not healthy. It's not a place I want to stay. It's not a place I need to be. And but I do have a good sense on an individual scale that who I am and who you are in relation to like as it go in regards to our relationship, that you have an expressed desire to adhere to some of those values that you just read off, that there's a respect there, that there's a trust there. And so therefore it's strange because I have to assess who I am as a whole, like as a person, in the grand scheme of society, and then individual levels. When I think about that definition of like assessing, does someone really have the desire to enter into a competent relationship with me as far as understanding me and my culture? Did I explain that kind of muddled up? Do you understand where I'm coming from?
I do. And what I'm thinking, I want to go back to this respect part of what I read because, and then combine that with the healthy sense of who they are and where they belong. Uh, a lack of respect for others, no matter who they are. The message of that is you're not okay and you don't belong. So when
Right.
we don't respect other people, who they are, where they're coming from, it's I can be judgmental. Hey, I can be just as judgmental as anybody. But there's this sense currently in our country, and I don't, and I know it's in other countries too, that because of the color of your skin or because of your religious beliefs, especially those two things, because of your gender orientation, those are the top three, I guess, that you're not okay. And if you're different from me, then you're not okay. That I'm the one that's okay and you're not. Is the underlying, I think, message that when we don't try to understand other people, we don't have to like anybody. We don't have to, you know, we don't have to be best buds with anybody. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about figuring out what your own worldview is and what you believe about the world, and ultimately at the very crux of that is when you were little, when you were tiny, and your view of the world is whether you can trust people. Uh, that's the main thing. That's the first one we get when we're little from our parents, from our surroundings. Can we can we trust you to take care of me? And that's the first worldview we get. And it develops into what's a mother? What's a father? What's a brother? What's a sister? What's a grandparent? You know, how do I negotiate all of that? And I think when people have a better sense of their own their own belief in themselves, their own self-respect, it's easier probably for them to have respect for other people as well, even if they don't look the same, they don't think the same. It's so easy to judge, and I'll put myself right there. I do it. We all do it. We all do it. So let's just not think that we don't. We're all judgmental. Come on. Let's let's
Yeah. Yeah. No,
let's
we yeah.
face that, you
Yeah.
know. And so if somebody doesn't believe like we do or look like, uh, I think there's, if I know there's, if you don't look like we do, that's not something I'm judgmental about, but I know that that's there. Um, it's it's so insidious, and we don't even know. Let's look at just a current event today.
Okay.
Let's look at the governor of New York. How about? And he's got these women that say, you touched, you put your hands on my face, you put your hand on my bare back, you put your you kissed me, you did those things. We got this shallow non apology on the air, on the news today, saying, well, if I made you feel that way, I'm sorry. That's a non apology. So he's saying, I didn't know that that would make you feel that way. Seriously? Where have you been for the last at least 10 years, So that's it's hard for me personally to not, as I just said, that I'm being judgmental of him, of his ignorance, of his belief, of his thinking that, you know, if you took my hand off of your bare back, and then he said she was aggressive, um that I can't not judge that. Okay, I'm going to admit that. So we this judgmental thing comes into play constantly,
Yeah. Well,
constantly.
and I believe that there's on the judgmental side of it, I believe that we're given this ability to judge for positive reasons. I think there's typical, the typical thing that we do is once something has a more, like we've been on the flip end of something and we didn't like it, we put a negative connotation on it and we say that this is negative. So someone could say like, oh, this person's got an attitude. Well, a person can have a good attitude just as
Mhm.
well as they could have a bad one. My judgment of you could be a positive judgment. It could be one that's based in fact that is affirming to you instead of condemning. So even my judgment still falls back on your pattern of behavior and what it is that you're doing. And that's kind of like my perspective on the. So I appreciate our ability to judge and would never want to take it away. I think
Mhm.
the key factor of when it comes to this is like I want to dispel kind of like the myth of why, and this is not coming out of like walk with me. It's not coming out of left field. Like this idea that we have to be separate and equal and our own thoughts and our own patterns on everything. Like this segregation is the answer to like, hey, I respect this person's culture. So, and I keep a boundary and they're over there and I'm over here. And we never learn to actually live together and benefit from one another. Um, this is that to me when like it's a lazy way of saying I'm culturally competent. I hear what they're saying. I see them over there and I respect them. They're separate and they're equal to me. And that's not equality. That's not equity. That's not creating a space of
Mhm.
of of true living and loving in an environment that's real to the reality that we live in. Because the truth of the matter is, you have to be willing to be a little bit uncomfortable and push into some of those spaces that actually push against our own beliefs so that we can become better people. Some of the things that I judge, like there are people who may judge me and you for being mask wearers. You know what I'm saying? But if they find out why we wear masks, and if they get, socially distanced close enough to us to figure out why we do what we do, maybe they become a little bit, maybe they grow and learn from us. So I guess my overall point is like sometimes we need to push past the initial uncomfortable stages in order to, in order to allow people to show you that they're worthy of their trust, of your trust. Because I think when we keep that distance, it also shows that we're not willing to trust or let a person, gain our trust.
I'd like to go from that to kind of four things that um, I think would help us to understand and communicate and effectively um, interact with people across all kinds of cultures. And four things, and of course, I'm going to read some of this. And I mentioned the worldview, and the first one's being aware of our own worldview, and that evolves. Uh, I have a different worldview, I know, than I did when I was younger, and part of it comes from travel. Part of it comes from being, around other people. If we're only around people just like us, how do we get to know anybody else? Oh, well, through reading, through movies, through um, but going different places. I mean, there's ways that influence what our worldview is, um, and I think that we we know if we have a we need to be aware if we have a narrow worldview or a wider worldview, and do we want a wider worldview, and what is that? We need to be aware what that is for us. But that's what Drew said is right. That's what that is. It's being, oh, I see you. I know you're different. Maybe I've studied your religion, or I've studied something about your culture, or I like to visit that culture. Okay, that increases your worldview, yes, but that's not everything that is important. Um, then developing positive attitudes toward cultural differences. Now, there's a lot of people that are already there, you know. Um, you've heard me say on the show, when I did my ancestry, and I think ancestry, uh, people figuring out where their roots are, I think that does help too in
It does.
helping
Yeah,
people to
tremendously.
develop a worldview. But people are, that shifts over, when people came to America. I mean, I have some real um, strong beliefs about that and about what we did as white people coming to America, about Native people. I have very strong beliefs about it. And I think it wasn't good what we did, just to put that out there. But uh, I always hoped I would find I had Native blood or African blood. I didn't. I was very disappointed in that. But um, we can have positive views toward cultural differences, and we can say, oh, I like to go to the India Fest. I like the food. I like the dancing. I like this and that. We can go to the Greek festival. Oh, I love their food. I love their whatever. I love that culture. We can go to, you know, all kinds of different festivals, or like reading about things. We can have that positive view of other cultures, but that's not the end of it. That's a step. That's a step. And then gain knowledge of different cultural practices and worldviews is a step further. It's like, oh, understanding where it came from. You know, I know people that have taken spiritual direction training, which I didn't even know was a thing for until several years ago. And when they do that, part of their study is about different religions and cultures of the world. So if people come to them for spiritual direction, they have knowledge, deep knowledge of what that means for them. And then developing skills for communication and interaction across cultures. There's so many ways that we can trip ourselves up and say things to people that have a different worldview than us that are offensive, and we don't even know it. So those are some things I think are important in developing a higher level of worldview and cultural competency.
One of the things that I like about that is the gaining. When you gain knowledge from other groups, with a sincere heart, you gain the knowledge, but you don't steal it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't. It's one thing to learn from it, apply it to your culture in your own context, but then there's another thing of, oh, I like the culture, so I'm going to take from this when I'm going to exploit it and I'm going to use it for my gain, or I'm going to, put a flag in it and say I discovered it, and so this is this is one of the problems. I think it goes beyond just you know the model of what you would say is uh blacks and white, like black people and white people, or black people with people of Asian descent. This is a problem across the board where people will just go into someone else's community and completely just take their idea and, of living the way they live and use it as an example of, to sell a product or to say something, opposed to honoring it. It's one, sometimes it's okay to just sit with knowing something about another group of people or a religious group or something, and not have to, either weaponize it or commodify. Like, you don't have to turn it into something. Sometimes it's okay just to know, and I
Mm-hmm.
think even that on an interpersonal friendship level is, one of the things that's always made me cringe is when a conversation of race comes up and I hear a person devalue a good friend of theirs who's of another culture by bringing up that friend as proof of their cultural competency or lack of racism that they have. And it's like, it's okay for you to be close to your white friend, and I'll keep it just with me. Like, this is though if I was getting in a conversation with someone that's like, well, I've got a white friend named Gigi. Like,
Yeah.
it devalues it really does devalue the nature of our relationship. It makes it more or less about like, hey, here's my mascot, or here's my badge of honor that I went into the wilderness and I found out about this amazing creature of another kind, and here's the proof of it. Because people, and I think that's gaining knowledge. That's one of the key factors that I think it's important for us to have a thirst to gain knowledge, but quench out that desire to, turn that into gainful knowledge. So,
Yeah. There's, some of the ways that we're going to be, and we would, excuse me, we really want to encourage you to make some comments to us about this series that we're doing and what we've said today. Call us out if you don't think we're right. You know, that's now we may judge you for it. No, I'm kidding. We do want to know. I've kind of listed some ways that some areas that we pursue trying to understand other people. Uh, there's always of course, the age difference. I mean, clearly, Drew and I have a vast age difference. And even though I internally think of myself as no older than what he is right now, and he doesn't understand that because he hasn't been my age. But maybe inside Drew, he may feel like he's still 16, I, or a younger age. But seriously, people look at older people, and they think they're old, and that's not how I feel. I feel like I'm like about, 25 inside, honestly. And people that are younger don't know that. So there's ageism. And I've, I may have mentioned this before. After a woman gets to be a certain age, she feels invisible. And we can talk about that some other time. But
That
there's
yeah, that
there's spiritual competency, spiritual differences, whether that's religion or something else, and the age. And then there's even some competency issues, cultural issues around children. If you think about how people raise their children, or what children should or should not be doing, or things like that. There's some competency issues around military people in the military, what the military does or doesn't do, um, how the military treats its members, um, just lots of different ways. Addictions.
yeah,
We have some cultural competency. That's hard to say repeatedly
it is.
about about people, about addictions, about people who are addicted, what they're addicted to, how they do it, how they get money to buy it, how they make it, just that whole. Uh, it's not just drugs either that we're talking about. We're talking about food. We're talking about lots of things in addictions. Uh, in marriage and family, people do marriage and family differently in all cultures. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Sexuality, that's kind of one of the forefronts right now in our society is talk about different communities and how that's going to play out. Even things like birth, abortions, death. There's clearly there's a lot of discussion right now about race and racial differences or sameness. You know, Drew and
Yeah.
I maybe look different, and we may be a different age, but we have a lot of the same beliefs and values, uh, goals, dreams, hopes for our families, for our marriage, you know.
Yeah. I,
And then just different competency about how to build a multicultural environment to live in that.
Now that one, that's gonna be, like I think that's the most interesting thing because that hits from what I had said earlier about most people have resolved that that's not possible, that we can't achieve that that's not going to be something that's on the docket. We can understand each other, but we got to go back to our corners in different ways. But I'm excited about all those things that you named off because those are all topics that we'll discuss, throughout this year, this seasons that we're going to go through. And one that I'm going to continuously bring up is the conversation around one of the enemies of being culturally competent is lumping. For lack of a bit, that's not
Mm-hmm.
a academic term. That's just calling it what it is. When we
Mm-hmm.
something I've been guilty of that I've had someone recently kind of just say, "Hey, it isn't always best to lead in with these lumping statements that are easier for us to say." So instead of calling out, let's say Black, Indigenous, Latinx or Latino, Hispanic, Asian, we'll say BIPOC, and just put it
Uh-huh.
as Black, Indigenous, people of color.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've taken people of color and lumped. multiple cultures into that one, and then has and highlighted just those two. Same thing with LGBTQIA plus.
Yeah,
The plus is
that gets bigger
infinity.
every year.
Yeah. So the plus when we get, like, but there are some, but how much more do you feel associated with something when you name it and when you say it out and you show it that respect, that of acknowledgement, and to just be reduced to, there was a social commentary that went over a lot of people's head that Dave Chappelle was expressing, because he's not politically correct in how he did it, but it was a double, thing that he was throwing out there when he made this commentary about the lettering, which was he was offensive to everyone equal in that statement, but it's a part of what we all do, by, just assigning a letter here and there. And so we're
Hmm.
going to talk about the ins and outs of those things. And I think for the last two shows, we've talked about what we're going to talk about. And we've gotten a good introduction to what we are. And so Gigi and I are going to go back into the lab, and we're going to figure some things out. And you're going to start seeing articles and other things from us here in the coming weeks. And we're going to really go after it to make sure that we bring you the best show, because everything that you named off, Gigi, I was, as I was writing them down, I was thinking, you know what? These are all things that matter um, in life. And even though they may not matter to me at this very moment, as one may not matter as much, they need to matter more to me later down the line, because they matter to someone else who may come into my life.
Hmm.
And that's important to be ready on the end of cultural competency. So that's my last words for today. Of course, hate can't drive out hate. Only love can do that. We love you for listening, and thank you for listening and watching. Gigi,
Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Martin Luther King. And we want your comments. We really, really do. So please share this with your friends and give us your comments and think about this as we go on this journey together. And we will see you next week on This Life Matters.